my name is Stephanie Zavilla, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a study conducted by Dr. Colquitt, Dr. No, and Dr. Jackson entitled Justice in Teams, Antecedents and Consequences of Procedural Justice Climate. So first we're going to start talking about what procedural justice actually is. It's defined as the perceived fairness of the decision-making procedures. How can we get procedural justice in a group? Well, the leader can foster input on decisions by the individual group members. The leader can make sure there's consistency in the procedures used to make decisions. The leader can make sure that there is bias suppression and information processing when considering information for a decision. And there can also be an element of correctability so that members feel that they have some say in the resolution of a decision. Procedural justice is important because it has been studied and found to link to increased job satisfaction, organizational commitment, citizenship behaviors, as well as increased job performance. There are a few limitations so far on the research that has been conducted on procedural justice. So far, up to date, most research that has been conducted has been focused on individuals. Now, the question is, can we go ahead and generalize these findings that have been conducted on individuals to the team setting? And just for the purposes of this study, I think it would be beneficial to go ahead and define what kind of team we're looking at. This definition right here is that a team is a collection of employees who are interdependent in their tasks, who share responsibility for team level outcomes, and who see themselves and are seen by others as a social entity. Many elements of this definition are important for this study, including this aspect of being seen or seeing themselves as a group. So that would speak to collectivism and team cohesion, and as well as the interdependent in their tasks and outcomes. So we're going to go ahead and look at what has been done already in the research. Like I said, there has been a lot of research that has been conducted. This just touches on two studies that are of particular importance in relation to this study that we're going to be talking about today. So the first one, Mossholder in 1998, linked justice perceptions to contextual factors, and this would include social norms within the group, as well as the workplace environments. And so these contextual factors, members over time will arrive at similar justice judgments. So this explains the variance between individual level commitment and satisfaction. The second study is by Noman and Bennett in 2000, and this study looked at justice climates arising from exposure to the same policies and leaders, shared meanings as a result of the social construct of the organization, and attraction of group members over time. And this explained the variance in individual helping behaviors, so looking at organizational commitment behaviors and citizenship behaviors. So there are questions that remain to be answered that this study hopefully goes about answering. One is, can it predict team level outcomes? So is procedural justice enough to predict greater increased team performance? Also, does climate strength have direct effects on team level outcomes? So the level of procedural justice or perceived procedural justice on team performance. And if we're looking at things a little bit more practically, then what team characteristics can be used to improve procedural justice? So we kind of just went over this, but the purpose of this study is to examine the relationship between procedural justice and team effectiveness. And this was measured in this particular study in terms of performance and absenteeism. So how well the team performs, as well as how many people leave the team or no longer engage in what it's doing. So we're also looking to see the relationship between the antecedents of procedural justice and the climate in both level and strength. So I'm going to go ahead and define what the researchers mean by level and strength. When they talk about procedural level, climate level, it means that it's talking about the group mean. So that means whether or not a group as a collective procedural justice rating is high or low. So it's basically kind of like a consensus. Climate strength, however, is the variance. So This is whether there's some outliers where most of the group feels that procedural justice is high and there are a few that feel that it's not high. So this is talking about variance and whether or not the group member ratings converge. So those two things are going to be very important as we get further along into the study. So this is pretty much what the researchers were predicting. This right here are the antecedents that they predict are going to affect eventually team performance and team absenteeism. We have team size, team diversity, so what kind of group members make up the group, and then we have team collectivism, how they see themselves as a group and if they have cohesion within their group. So both of these, or all three of these antecedents, affect the level and the strength, and we just talked about those being the level of variance and the level of convergence when members perceive procedural justice ratings. Those two combine to create an environment in which either fosters team performance and lessens team absenteeism, or does just the opposite. Performance goes down and absenteeism goes up. So these are their predictions, and we'll get into the hypotheses in just a minute. So, hypothesis 1. The first hypothesis concerns the climate level of procedural justice, which is, if you recall, we just talked about, the overall rating of procedural justice in a group. So what this, the researchers based their predictions off two models of justice. The first one is the instrumental model of justice, which is a model in which members believe their interests will be protected, so it promotes loyalty and cohesiveness. So if they think that things that matter to them are being protected, then they're more likely to be loyal to the team. Makes sense. So then we have the relational model of justice. People feel valued by their authority figures, they're more willing to comply with the rules. This also makes sense. If somebody feels like they're valued, then they're going to follow along with what the group is going with. So in hypothesis 1, the researchers take these two models and combine it to say that procedural justice climate level will be positively related to team performance and negatively related to absenteeism. In the second hypothesis, we have climate strength, which is the variation, if you recall, of members' perceived ratings of justice. Now, if this is low, leaders might give more control to some than others, which would create a sense of unfairness. Not everybody may have a voice. There may be some bias in information processing or the decision-making process. There might be rewards towards seniority. There are a number of things that could contribute to this. Either way, it's going to lead to lower cooperation and performance by the group. So the second hypothesis is that procedural justice climate strength will be positively related to team performance and negatively related to absenteeism, just like the level of strength, or just like the level of climate. In the third hypothesis, we notice that judgments are formed very quickly. So the initial reaction of a judgment is called the judgment phase. This is when a person first appraises a situation and makes their instinctual reaction. Then they go into another phase. They use that judgment as a heuristic for deciding between responses that are in favor and in cooperation of their self-interests or within the realm of the team. So they kind of weigh those two options, and this is called the use phase. So they decide based on that. People in general tend to stick with their judgments. If new information is produced or introduced into the situation, then members are more likely to enter a phase-shifting event. And this is when people re-enter the judgment phase and start the process all over again. And so this could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, just depends on the situation. Logically, it would be safe to say that there is a low climate strength and lots of variance. People would be shifting their judgments around. So that leaves a lot of room for procedural justice discontent if people are constantly changing their minds on their judgments of the decision-making process. So we have hypothesis 3 that states the relationships with climate level will be stronger when climate strength is higher than when it is lower. So we want everybody to think as a collective rather than having variance. The fourth hypothesis we have here is that we're going to start looking at those antecedents. So we're looking at team size first. Larger teams have less average participation by individual members, so they are less likely to to voice their opinions. So this would be like a group of people that's 5 people and then a group that's 50 people. Obviously, when you're in a group that's 50 people, it's harder to be able to voice your opinion than if you were in a group with 5 people. So, hypothesis 4 states that team size will be negatively related to procedural justice climate level. So, hypothesis 5 goes about talking about that diversity element of the antecedents. Minorities in the form of not necessarily just ethnicity, but also in gender and in age, present communication difficulties that in some circumstances can cause differences amongst team members. So if there's communication difficulties, then hypothesis 5 states that team diversity will be negatively related to procedural justice climate level. In hypothesis 6, we're looking at cohesiveness and collectivism as an antecedent. Collectivism is the degree to which the interests and well-being of the team take precedent over individual interests. This would foster harmony and solidarity, obviously, if people are willing to, if they see themselves as a whole, they're more willing to put more effort for the group rather than looking at self-interest above the group. So, hypothesis 6 states that team collectivism will be positively related to procedural justice climate. Hypothesis 7, we're looking at a model of the researchers, we're looking at bond strength between members. So we're back to team size. And this time we're looking at the strength of the climate, not the level. So bond strength between members is created by physical proximity, in which increases the likelihood of interaction. So if you're closely related, if you're close physically to somebody, then you're more likely to share interactions, talk about maybe your perceptions about how things are, how decisions are made and your ratings of procedural justice, as opposed to maybe in the case of virtual teams where you don't meet people face to face. So hypothesis 7 states that team size will be negatively related to procedural justice climate strength. Hypothesis 8 looks at the demographic diversity, again that's ethnicity, age, and gender, and that can create psychological distance between people. If people don't feel like they know somebody that well, or if they're not able to communicate that well, there's psychological differences in culture, that will create distance between members that will interfere with their ability to see themselves as one cohesive group. So hypothesis 8 states that team diversity will be negatively related to procedural justice climate strength. And in the last hypothesis, hypothesis 9, we're looking at collectivism again, and this time in terms of climate strength. So collectivism inspires reduced physical and psychological distances. So those two differences that we just looked at in both diversity and in physical proximity, collectivism takes those away. So collectivistic people often communicate using the pronoun we rather than I when they're describing their group work or their part in the group. So team collectivism will be positively related to the procedural justice climate strength. So now we're to the method. The researchers took almost, so it looks like 1,750 employees working in 88 teams throughout 6 different automobile parts manufacturing firms. And they decided to, let me see here, the climate level was determined through surveys. So group members were asked to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 to what extent the following things occurred. To what extent were team members able to express their opinion, able to influence the outcomes arrived at by the procedures, and to what extent members were able to appeal those outcomes. Those look at some of the things that we talked about in the very beginning that foster procedural justice. Climate strength was calculated by taking the standard deviation of team members' procedural justice perceptions and dividing it by the team mean level, and then reverse the sign so that we could tell how strong the effect was. Team performance was evaluated by the team leaders. Since they know their team the best, they know when that team is performing well and when they're not performing well. The group is normally held that they were rated on how they normally performed in productivity, timeliness, safety, order accuracy, efficiency, and quality. So we looked at many different avenues there. Absenteeism data was supplied by each plant, so each automobile plant provided that information for the researchers as to how many people dropped out from teams or disengaged. Team diversity was determined by asking, this is a little bit interesting, they asked each person in the group what their perceptions of the diversity in the group were. So they didn't actually take a poll or actually count the number of people over 55 or females versus males. They didn't go about doing it like that just for confidentiality reasons. So they went about it by asking the team members' perceptions of the amount of diversity in their group, whether they thought there was a lot of diversity or whether they thought there wasn't that much. So that was interesting. Collectivism was measured by having members take a survey that asked questions similar to, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. And that would go ahead and signify that that person is not very collectivistic and doesn't see themselves as part of a group. Other questions would be, people on a team should be willing to make sacrifices for the team's well-being, and that would signify that that person does affiliate with the team and is collectivistic in nature. So, we have some results. We looked at the results from the study. Hypothesis 2 was not supported, and that hypothesis again was that climate strength did not significantly relate to performance and absenteeism. So that's interesting. We have hypothesis 5 that was not supported, which team diversity did not significantly relate to climate level. And once again, level is the amount of variance. So it turns out that climate was not affected by the diversity within groups. And hypothesis 9 was not supported, that collectivism was not significantly related to climate strength. That's probably the most surprising one, because you would think if a group is more collective, then they would have a stronger collective belief about procedural justice. So that one was very interesting. Otherwise, everything else was supported. So this provides lots of support for taking the individual results of studies that have been done in years past and being able to take that over to teamwork. So, the takeaway: good procedural justice climate equals team effectiveness. Justice is valued because it protects the members' long-term interests, which then turns to promoting loyalty and compliance. So as a leader, having good procedural justice is very important. Also, we have that, that climate strength moderates the climate level. So if you have a strong climate strength, you are not necessarily going to have that much more variance. So that's the moderating factor. Also, when we're talking strictly in terms of procedural justice, larger and more diverse teams are less favorable according to the data. Now, this is not to say that having diversity in terms of different cultural beliefs, different expectations, different experiences, not to say that that's not helpful in a group situation, but in terms of procedural justice, it causes more variance, not necessarily the best thing that you want. Also, larger teams, definitely not going to help. There's a lot more room for distraction, there's a lot more distance between people, so you're not going to have a cohesive group with a rating of procedural justice. And collectivism is obviously more favorable. Now, this is also in terms of just procedural justice, because as we know, sometimes collectivism can have negative effects, like maybe in the groupthink situation. Practical implications. So, we've got leaders. To improve effectiveness on your team, you can do the following things that are in line with improving your decision-making process. You can give members more involvement in key decisions. You can give them opportunities to appeal decisions so they don't feel like the final decision is absolutely concrete, that they have a say in whether or not that is effective. Then you can also make decisions with consistent procedures, so not wavering between different ways of making decisions. This is very common in sports, where a coach will play one player based on a very strict set of guidelines, like they earned that position due to a very strict set of guidelines, and then another player will come along, maybe break a rule along the way, but that person will still be played. That is a discrepancy in decision-making procedures that can cause a lot of unsettling, unhappiness amongst your other team members. You can also eliminate bias from the decision-making process, so just making sure that you take all information in while making a decision on a very even and unbiased demeanor. You can also explain reasoning behind decisions. Providing a rationale is proven to make people go along with it more. If they understand why you made that decision, they're more than likely going to go along with it, or at least be happier about it. So overall, a leader should be a climate engineer. You should be able to manipulate the climate in which you make decisions so that your team will have higher satisfaction, and therefore that will translate into increased performance. So, limitations in this study: the data was cross-sectional, so we cannot necessarily determine causality, even though we can see some sort of correlational relationships. We can't necessarily determine this causes this. So we also, what we were talking about before, the diversity demographics being collected based off of members' perceptions. Since that was due to confidentiality, we don't 100% know exactly how diversified the groups were. We're just based off of other members' perceptions. So there's a little bit of variability there that could be cleared up. Also, team studies here were much larger than used in most organizations. Like, as we know, the business world is more and more using teams, and they're normally smaller than 20 people, I would guess. So that could be something to do in the future, possibly, is look at smaller group settings and see if these cohesive effects, collectivism, diversity, if all these antecedents and effects have the same consequences in smaller groups. Future research, we could look at the bigger picture. We could see if these conclusions could generalize to the organizational level. Not necessarily looking at small work groups, but also looking at hierarchical management to, assistants, down to employees. We could also look at this in the coaching or athletic arena, talking about coaches, assistant coaches, team. We can also explore other ways of fostering procedural justice climate. There's always going to be ways to make people feel like they're being treated fairly, and I think that would be worth looking into. So if you're interested in this, here's the link, or I guess the citation for the study that I looked at. If you want the whole story, go ahead and go to that. Thanks for your time, and hope you have a great day.